How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're on Daf Mem, Daf 40 of Masechta Shevuos. Friends, your friends. Okay. Well, we continue, I guess you can say, discussing the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel that we got to at the end of yesterday's daf about the significance of shtei kesef, of the two silver coins. Is that, as Rav has, that is the minimum that must be denied? Okay, that you can't just be like, somebody says, you owe me $1,000, and he says, no, it's 1,000 minus a pruta. That would not be enough of a denial. Whereas Shmuel says, no, denying a pruta can be a denial that you would have to make a shvuah for, just that the initial amount being claimed by the claimant has to be at least 2 kesefs. Anyways, so we're going to start with kind of more discussion of that machlokes, and then we're going to get to other related machlokes and related to Moed b'miktzas. So very, very, very interesting stuff here on Babel on Talmud. Here we go. Okay, we're going to start on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, first wide line. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Shtei kesef yesh li biyodcha eincha biyod el pruta. So I had actually Potter. So I think I had explained this when we learned the Mishnah. I think I had actually explained this incorrectly. So the Mishnah says Shtei kesef yesh li biyodcha. So Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me 2 kesefs. Now this means 2 ma'az of kesef. I think when I was explaining the Mishnah, I had explained it as 2 like clumps of silver. No. I think it's 2 silver coins, 2 silver ma'az. And Chabiyad el pruta, and Reuven says, all I have is a pruta of copper. Potter, and we're saying Potter. Okay. My timer, how come? Lav mishum de chasra lo taino v'tiyuvta de Shmuel. Amlach Shmuel misavet shave kata. Okay. Amlach Shmuel misavet shave katani, davka katani, mashatana lahodalo, mashahodalo lo toano. Okay. So, okay, so here is the thing. If we are talking about the value of 2 silver ma'az, okay, basically there are 2 ways. Oh gosh, I feel like I need more coffee. Wait 1 second. I'm still kind of like coming off of this like cold thing that snuck up on me at the end of the week last week. But anyways, I feel like I need a little bit more coffee, but what can I tell you? We gotta go weiter. So basically there are, okay, so we just had this case, okay? We just mentioned this case. Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me 2 silver ma'az, which are coins, 2 silver coins, 2 silver ma'az. And Reuven says, what I owe you is 1 pruta. And a pruta is nechoshes, copper. Now here's the thing. The question is, what when we talk about shtei kesef and pruta, what exactly do we mean by that? Do we mean the value of 2 kesefs and the value of a pruta? Meaning, as we said, I think it was yesterday, basically shtei kesef is 64 prutas, I believe. Let's just go with that. Right? Because 8 prutas in Isser, 2 Issers in a pundion, so 1 pundion is 16 prutas, 2 pundions in a ma, so it's 32 prutas in a ma, and 2 ma'as is 64 prutas. So I think I did that math correctly. So basically, if we're talking about values over here, so basically the conversation goes like this. Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me 2 kesefs, i.e., Reuven, you owe me 64 prutas. And Reuven says, no, I owe you 1 pruta. So this is not about silver versus copper. This is about what the value of the loan was. The other way to learn this is literally. Shimon says, I gave you silver. Reuven says, no, it's copper. A lot less copper. So in that case, it's apples and oranges. Shimon's talking about silver. Reuven's talking about copper. So initially, right now, what we want to say, oh gosh, is this going to be another long daf? Oh, I really hope not. I mean, these dafs are, like every daf is like an hour, you know? This is like mamish nizik. We're like back in like Bav Mitzia over here. I don't know, Kiddushin, I don't know where we are. Kiddushin, Bav Mitzia, Bav Akama, somewhere in those mesechtas, which were gewaldige mesechtas. But like, we like kind of moved on from that. And we're like back in the thick of it. Prutas and ma'as and shove and woof. It's the best. It's the best. Thank you, Hashem. Hashem, thank you for giving us Daf Mem of Masechta Shevuos. Mamash, it's Erev Shevuos right now. It's Erev Shevuos right now when I'm recording Daf Mem of Masechta Shevuos, and I am thrilled for Zman Ma'at Torah Seinu, for Kabbalah Satorah. I was looking the other day at the Daf Samech Ches of Masechta Psochim, right, where Rav Shesha says, Chadu nafshoy, loch karoi, loch tanoi. Rav Shesha would tell his soul to be happy because he learns Torah. Back to Daf Mem of Masechta Shavuos. So be'etzem, so that's the shaila. Is it the value of 2 silver coins versus the value of a pruta? Or are we talking about literally silver versus copper? So, back into the Gemara. So tonight, we learned in our Mishnah, Shtei kesef, yesh li biyodcho, incha biyodei lepruta potter. So, our Mishnah says that if Shimon says to Reuven, hey, give me my Shtei kesef, and he says, what are you talking about? I'll give you 1 pruta. So we say he's potter. So now, we're assuming for now that we're talking about values. So basically, Shimon is saying to Reuven, you owe me 64 prutas, and Reuven is saying, I owe you 1 pruta. That's basically what's happening if we're talking about values, right? Because Shtei Kesef is 64 prutas. And basically, so now what do we see? So basically, Shimon says, you owe me 64 prutas. Reuven says, I only owe you 1 pruta. And we're saying potter, that it's not considered modeh b'miktsas. Why not? It sounds like it's like Rav. That, well, because he's only denying, right? 63 prutas, we need it to be Shtei Kesef. The minimum denial has to be Shtei Kesef, at least 64 prutas. But he's only denying 63 prutas. So my lab, Mishum, the Chasra Latayna, V'tiyufta de Shmuel. So it sounds like because the initial taina, I think this is how to explain it literally, that the initial taina of 64 prutas is now, Reuven is saying it's only 1 pruta, which means that now it's less than 64 prutas, which is less than Shtei Kesef, and therefore it's not a significant denial. It's not a significant enough denial. And it's a kasha on Shmuel, because Shmuel says that the initial claim has to be for at least 2 kesef, at least 64 prutas, which it was. And even though Reuven denied part of it, according to Shmuel, it doesn't matter, as long as the initial claim was 64 prutas. But here we're saying, even though the initial claim was 64 prutas, still potter. So Shmuel responds, Misavet shave katani. Do you really think that when it says Shtei Kesef means the value of Shtei Kesef? No. Davka katani. It literally means what it says. Shimon says, you owe me silver. Reuven says, no, I owe you copper. Therefore, it's apples and oranges. That's why Reuven is potter. That's why there's no shvuah, because Shimon is claiming an apple, and Reuven is saying he owes him an orange. Shimon is claiming silver. Reuven says copper. Mashatana lo hodelo. What Shimon is claiming is not what Reuven is admitting to. Mashatana lo toano, and what Reuven is admitting to is not what Shimon is claiming. So therefore, Shmuel argues that when the Mishnah is talking about shtei kesef and prutas, it's talking literally silver coins and copper coins. Copper coins sounds like Capricorn. Capricorn. I'm a Capricorn, I think. I think that's what I am. Capricorn. What's Capricorn in Hebrew? Somebody at Babylon Talmud must be into these things. What's Capricorn in Hebrew? I should probably know that. But I don't. Well, I do somewhere in my head. In like my, in the stuff that's kind of hidden away and archived. But if that's the case, that the Mishnah is literal, then I will tell you the Seifa. Wow, this is going to be a long daf. What time is it? It's like 4:15, 5:15, Shavuos is 7, Yom Tov is Shevuos. I should have enough time. Man, these dafs are something else. But if so that the Mishnah is to be taken literally, then I will quote for you the Seifa. Shtei kesef upruta yesh li biyadcha. Shimon says, I have 2 silver coins and a copper coin, right? 2 shtei kesef and a pruta. Yesh li biyadcha, you owe me. Ein lecha biyadi ela pruta. And Reuven says, all I have is a pruta. And he doesn't say anything about the silver coins. He says, I got your pruta, I got nothing about the silver coins. Chayev, and we say chayev. Yomer bishlama shavet. So I understand if we're talking about values, that Shimon is saying, you owe me basically 65 prutas, right? 2 kesef and a pruta. So if we say we're talking about values, and Shimon says, you owe me 65 prutas essentially, and Reuven says, I owe you 1 pruta. So then, so now in this, right? So he's claiming 65 prutas. He's saying I have 1 pruta. He's denying 64 prutas. So I understand why Reuven is chayiv to swear. Where am I? So let me say, shtei kesef pruta yesh biyadcha. Ein lecha biyad ela pruta chayiv. Yomer bishlama shaveh b'shemachi chayiv. Eli yomer davke amay chayiv. But if you say davke, literal, then why is Reuven chayiv? Mashetano lo hodalo, mashodalo lo toano. That what Shimon is claiming Reuven is not admitting to, and vice versa. What Reuven is admitting to is not what Shimon claimed. So meaning, basically Shimon, I guess, is claiming, if you say it's literal, so Shimon is claiming kesef and copper, right, silver and copper, and Reuven is, I guess, only admitting to the copper, but not saying anything about the silver, and I guess that's not considered denying, right, the admittance / denial being from the same type as the claim, because the claim included silver, and I guess he didn't deny anything about silver. But anyways, midu taima el Shmuel. But anyways, that's not really a question, because this is, you're asking on Shmuel. Ha'omer of Nachman, Shmuel, but Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, as we're going to see later on in the daf, Tanu chitin v'sorin, that if Shimon says to Reuven, you owe me wheat and barley, v'hodlo be'echad man, and Reuven only admits to one of them, let's say the barley, chayev. He's going to be chayev for that. Hachinami zeu. So the thing is, Shmuel's opinion, as we're going to see later, is that if Shimon says to Reuven, you owe me wheat and barley, and Reuven says, I only owe you barley, Shimon would say, that would be modeh b'miktsas. Shmuel would say, that would be modeh b'miktsas, and Reuven would have to swear. So therefore, here also, even if you say that it's literal, and Shimon is saying, you owe me 2 silver coins and a copper coin, right? You owe me 2 kesef, right, shtei kesef and a pruta. And Reuven says, yeah, the pruta I owe you, but not the shtei kesef. So, according to Shmuel, that would be the equivalent of the wheat and the barley, and he admits to the barley. And Reuven and Shmuel would say that he's chayiv to swear. So therefore, it's not a problem. You could say that shtei kesef and pruta are literal, and still Reuven would have to swear according to Shmuel, since he's admitting to the pruta, which is part of Shimon's claim. Hachinami mistavra, and his taka makes sense that to argue that the Mishnah is literal, like Shmuel is saying. Midikatani seifa, because what does it say in the seifa of the Mishnah? Litra zav yesh li biyadcha ein lecha biyadi ela litra kesef potter. The Mishnah then says that so a litra is a certain weight, right? It's like let's say like a gram. Okay, so if Shimon says you owe me a gram of gold, and he says I owe you a gram of silver, so we say potter, because Shimon's talking about gold, Reuven's talking about silver. So Iyamar Bishlama, I understand Davko Katani, I understand if we're talking about literally. So Mishumachi potter. That's why Reuven is potter, because the admittance is not consistent with the claim. Right? Shimon's talking about gold, Reuven's talking about silver. Eli Amrit Shaveh, but if you say that the Mishnah is talking about values, well then am I potter? Why is Reuven potter? Clearly gold is more valuable than silver. And if we're talking about values, so then Shimon is saying you owe me the value of a gram of gold, and Reuven is saying I owe you the value of a gram of silver. That's modeh b'miktsas. Of course you should be chayiv. So my potter, why is he potter? Litra tuva ave. It's a good, right? It's a valid claim with a proper what does Rashi say? Kfir voda. There's a proper admittance and denial. Shimon saying you owe me the value of gold. Reuven saying I owe you the value of silver. You should be chayiv for that. So from the fact that we say potter, it must be literal. That Shimon's talking about gold and Reuven's talking about silver, and they're different things. So let me the seifa davka reishinami davka. Okay, fine. So we're going to say therefore that if the seifa is davka with the gram of gold and the gram of silver, so if the seifa is davka, then the reisha is also davka. So when we talk about Shimon says you owe me 2 shtei kesef, Reuven says I owe you a pruta. So we're saying that it's literal, and that is why Reuven is potter, because Shimon's talking about silver, Reuven's talking about copper, implying what? That if it were to be talking about values, then you would be chayiv. Meaning, if Shimon says to Reuven, you owe me shtei kesef, 64 pruta, right? If we're talking about values, so 64 prutas, and Reuven says, no, I only owe you 1 pruta, so in effect he's denying 63 prutas, he would be chayiv for that. Right? We're saying he's potter because we take it literally, and therefore Shimon's talking about silver and Reuven's talking about copper. But if we were to say that it's talking about values, Shimon claims 64 prutas, Reuven says 1 pruta, he would be chayiv even though the denial is less than shtei kesef, is less than 64 prutas. So leimat havituv to the Rav. So let's say therefore that this mahalach is a kasha on Rav, because Rav says that the denial would have to be at least 64 prutas, but we just said that since the Mishnah is talking literally, so the reason why he's potter in the reisha is because Shimon's talking about silver and Reuven's talking about copper, but if they're talking about values, he would be chayiv, even though the denial is for less than 64 prutas. It's for 63 prutas, even though the minimum according to Rav is shtei kesef, which is 64 prutas. So to the Rav. Let's say this is a kasha on Rav. Shnekis, we're up to 20 minutes already. We haven't even started today's daf. We're still on yesterday's daf. And we're about to be on today's daf. But Shnekis, this is going to be another long one. Wow, my goodness gracious. Okay. I'm like running out of time here to record. And it was Erev Shabbos when I recorded last time. Now it's Erev Yom Tif. I had to record 2 on Friday. I'm recording 2 today. I'm literally running out of time. This is nuts. Akoponim Baruch Hashem. So Omer Lach Rab Kula Masnisin Shavet. Rav says no. Understand the Mishnah as referring to Shavet. understand the Mishnah is referring to Shaveh. And therefore, Rav says, when the Mishnah says Shimon is claiming Shtei Kesef, and Ruvain is saying, no, it's just a pruta, potter, because we're talking about values, says Rav. Therefore, Shimon effectively is claiming 64 prutas. Ruvain is saying, no, it's one pruta. He's denying 63 prutas, which is less than the minimum denial required, which is Shtei Kesef, which is 64 prutas, but he's only denying 63, therefore he's potter. The litra zov shiny. You can ask the kasha about litra zov, because if we're talking about, right, we said the gram of, I'm making up that a litra is a gram, just so we can kind of work with things that we're more familiar with. Right, so yeah, what about the fact that we said that if Shimon says a gram of gold, and Reuven says, no, it's a gram of silver, we say he's potter. Isn't that because Shimon's talking about gold and Reuven's talking about silver? If we're talking about values, Reuven should be chayiv. We say ena chinami, but in that case, it's obvious that it's literal, and it's not talking about values, because he's talking, if Shimon's saying, hey, you owe me a gram of gold, so he's not talking about, you owe me the equivalent of a gram of gold. No, he's saying, I gave you gold, I expect to get gold back. And Reuven says, no, I only have silver. Okay, once we're talking about weights, so then we're talking about actual metals. We're not talking about values. But if we're talking about coins are values, right? If somebody says, I gave you $1, he says, no, you gave me 25 cents. So we're not going to say, oh, they're talking about different things. No, if we're talking about coins, if we're talking about currency, so those are talking about values. But if we're talking about like weights, right? Shimon's saying, I gave you a gram of gold, and Reuven's saying a gram of silver, clearly we're talking about actual metals there. But if we're talking about currencies, says Rav, we're talking about values. And therefore, says Rav, when the Mishnah said, when Shimon says, I gave you shtei kesef, right, 2 ma'as, 2 coins, 2 silver coins, and Reuven says, no, it's just a pruta, they're talking about values over there, and therefore you're potter because you're only denying, right, you're denying less than 2 kesef. The denial is less than 2 kesef. However, when we're talking about, let's say grams of gold versus grams of silver, that's not talking about value, that's talking about actual metals there, and therefore if Shimon's talking about gold and Reuven's talking about silver, that's going to be apples and oranges, and he's going to be potter. The zav shiny, and therefore the weight of the measurement of zav is different. Teda, and you should know that, right, the top Rashi of Mem Amud Aleph, the Shar Maslisin Shaveh Katani, that the rest of the Mishnah, other than the litra of gold and silver, is talking about values, right? So when Shimon says shtei kesef, when Reuven says a pruta, talking about those values. The Katani Seifa, because it says at the Seifa of the Mishnah, Dinar Zav Yeshli B'Yodcha. Shimon says, to Reuven, give me my golden dinar. Ein l'cha b'yadi ela dinar kesef, utrisis, ufundion, ufruta, chay, shekol min matbea achasein. So it says in the Seifa of the Mishnah that if Shimon says, hey Reuven, you owe me a dinar of gold, but Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me a dinar of gold. And Reuven says, no, a dinar of silver, or even a pruta. So meaning, Shimon's talking about gold, Reuven's talking about silver, maybe copper. And even so, right, so Shimon's talking about gold, Reuven's talking about silver, copper, and even so, we're saying that Reuven is chayiv, because it's all mimin matbeya, achas. It's all one, it's all the same type of coin, i.e. the same type of currency value, right? And therefore, he is chayiv, even though, yes, there's gold, there's silver, there's copper, but we're talking about value there, and that's why Reuven is chayiv. So I understand if we're talking about values, so Mishumachi chayiv. That's why Reuven is chayiv, right? Because even though Shimon's talking about gold and he's talking about silver or copper, but it's talking about the value of a gold dinar versus the value of a silver dinar or a pruta. We're talking about values there. But if you say literally, so why is it chayiv? We're saying that literally Shimon's talking about a golden dinar, and Reuven is talking about a silver dinar or a pruta. Well, then all of a sudden Shimon's talking about gold, Reuven's talking about silver, copper. That should be apples and oranges. Omer Belazar says, Belazar b'shetanu bedinar matbeos. Well, the Seifa is talking about where Shimon makes it clear that he's talking about bedinar matbeos. He makes it clear that he's talking about coins. Makes it clear that he's talking about coins, minted coins, and therefore it's not important whether this one is gold or this one's silver or this one's copper. Right? It doesn't matter whether it's a nickel, which is, I don't know, what a nickel's made out of? Silver? I don't know. Or a penny, which is made out of copper, I guess. Meaning, right. So let's just say that. I don't know what the heck American currency is made out of. So let's just say a nickel is made out of silver and a penny is made out of copper. So it's not important that like Shimon's talking about a dime and Reuben's talking about a penny, therefore they're different. No, he says matbeos, coins, right? They're all yes, where they're different is that one is silver and one is copper, but where they're the same is that they're both in the family of coins. And so it's talking about says b'dinar matbeos, where it's Shimon says, you owe me a dinar of a minted dinar coin. And therefore, the emphasis is on the fact that he's owed coins, not on the fact that he's owed, gold or silver per se. So according to Shmuel, who says that the Mishnah is literal, however, in the Seifa, as Rabbi Elazar explained, even though yes, if we take things literally, Shimon's talking about gold, and then Reuben's talking about silver and copper. However, says Rabbi Elazar is talking about where he said, a dinar coin, and therefore the important thing for Shimon is that he's owed money, is that he's owed coin. What's less important, or what's not significant at all, is that it's gold versus silver versus copper. What's important is that he gets back the coins that he's owed, whether they're in hundreds or 50s or dollars, singles, or whatever. Like that part is not important. And what it's coming to teach us is that even pruta, right, even the smallest denomination would be considered among those coins. And if Reuven says all I owe is a pruta, it would still be considered a denial that he would be chayav for. Daika nami. It can also be inferred shakol min matbea achas. Because the Mishnah then says, why is Reuven chayiv, right? When Shimon is talking about a golden dinar, and then Reuven is talking, what is it? Dinar zav yeshcha. So Shimon's talking about golden dinar, and then Reuven's talking about silver dinars, copper, or prutas. So we say he's chayiv because shakol min matbea achas, because they're all the same type, the same family of coins. And that's what the Mishnah says. That's why it's chayiv, because they're all coins, right? In line with what Rabbi Elazar is saying, is that what's important is that they're minted coins rather than whether it's a silver coin or a gold coin, or as long as he's getting back what he's owed in coins. V'Rav shakol din matbea achas. But Rav says that they all have the same din of a coin, meaning even the pruta. So meaning according to Rav, the point is not that they're all coins, because Rav says that they're talking about values, right? So the point is that they all have the same din of a matbeya, and therefore, even if he denies a pruta, they all have the same din of a matbeya, and the din of the value of the coins, and therefore you'd be chayiv for it. Now, fine, Rabbi Elazar, so now let's say, according to Rabbi Elazar, let us say, the Seifa kishmu mitaritz, that if Rabbi Elazar is explaining the Seifa by the coins to be where it's talking about, focusing on the mintedness of the coin, on the coin itself, which is like Shmuel is talking about, like actual coins and not just values. So then, the Seifa ki Shmuel mitaritz, ve'shinami ki Shmuel svile. So let's say that Rabbi Elazar agrees with Shmuel also in the Reisha, in terms of that the Reisha is talking about literal, but not the actual values. Lo seifa davka dikatoni shakol min matbea achas. No, Rabbi Elazar learns the seifa how he learns it, because it says "akol min matbea achas." Right, that's what the Mishnah says. It's all the same type of coins. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar assumes that this learns the seifa as referring to coins. However, for Reisha kravo kishmuel, but in the Reisha you could learn either like like Rav, that it's talking about values, or like Shmuel, that it's talking about literal. It could go either. We don't know what Rabbi Elazar would necessarily say about the ratio, but the Seifa, he says it's talking about coins. Sheesh. Okay. Now, Tashma Kaminir, Dinar Zahav Zahuv Li Biyodcha. If Shimon says to Ruvain, I have a dinar of Zahav Zahuv, i.e., a coin, a golden coin. Zahuv is a minted golden coin, is what I have. Li Biyodcha. In Chabiyad el dinar kesef, Ruvain says, no, we're talking about a dinar of kesef, chayev. So in that case, chayev, because there he's talking, right, again, the emphasis is on the fact that they are coins. Taima de Omar le zahav zahuv. So now what we want to say is the reason why we're talking about, why we're assuming that we're talking about coins, is because he specified that we're talking about coins. He dafka said zahav zahuv hastama, but if he wouldn't have specifically said zahuv, so shavik ka Omar le. Let's assume that if he didn't specify zahuv, so then we would assume that we're talking about the value of it, like Rav, not the actual coin. So Ravashi Achi Ka'omar, Ravashi says not necessarily. You could say Kol Omer Dinar Zav Ki Omer Dinar Zav Zahuv Dami. You could say also like Shmuel that it's literally because anybody who says Dinar Zahav, it's like he says Dinar Zahav Zahuv. It's the equivalent of saying Dinar Zahav Zahuv. I.e., you could argue that by default it would be talking about coins. Tani Reb Chia L'Sayure L'Rav. Oh, shnikes. Dag nabbit. That's Erev Yontif. Alright, what am I doing here? I guess we're going downstairs again. Dag nabbit. Alright, gonna hide in the corner. Okay, IDF, do your thing. Please, Hashem, IDF, hopefully, everything will be alright. The awkward wait. Okay. Well, seems like the sirens are off. Okay. Alright, hopefully we can go back to recording Babylon Talmud. Okay. My oh my. Shnikes. Oh boy. Okay. What were we talking about again? We were talking about oh my. Okay, we were talking about where were we? Okay, Gewaldig. Okay, so that's my okay, fine. Right, exactly. So we said that Reb Chia is coming to support Rav. Right? So Tani Reb Chia the Rav. So Reb Chia, Rav's uncle Reb Chia, is coming to support Rav. Out of breath from walking up and down the stairs, make me exercise. Alkol ponim. So Rav's uncle Reb Chia is coming to give him some support. That's very nice of him. So Sela li biyodcha. If Shimon says to Ruvain, you owe me a sela. Ein l'cha biyodi ela sela chaser beis kesef chayiv. So if Shimon says to Ruvain, you owe me a sela. Ruvain says, no, I owe you a sela minus 2 kesefs. That's what I owe you. So then chayiv. Chaser ma'a potter. But if he says, I owe you a sela minus 1 kesef, so then he's potter. Why? Right? Even though the claim is significant enough, right? Because a sela is, I think, 2 dinars. So meaning, one dinar, or maybe it's 4. I'll look it up in a second. But 1 dinar is it's a 6 ma'a in 1 dinar, and then a sela is maybe 4 dinars. I feel like a sela is maybe 4 dinars. But the point is that a sela is definitely large enough. Okay, it's 1 sela is 2 shekels, and a shekel is 2 dinars. Yeah, so a sela is 4 dinars. Anyways, so the point is, even though the claim is enough, it sounds like from this brisa that if the denial is only 1 ma'a, that is not enough, and therefore he's going to be potter, like Rav says that the denial has to be at least 2 ma'as, at least 2 kesefs. Okay, fine. Where am I? Omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer Shmuel. So I don't think it's actually Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer Shmuel. There's different options. I'm just going to read Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer Shmuel because that's what's written, but I don't think it's actually correct. We're going to see in a few lines from now Rav Nachman Omer Shmuel, which does make sense. Anyways, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omer Shmuel lo yishanu ela b'tainas malve vodas love aval tainas malve v'ha'adoas eid echad afilu lo toanu ela pruta chayev. My time the chsiv lo yokom eid echad beish chol avon chol chatas u'deino kom aval komu l'shvua v'tanu kol makom sheshnayim mechayven oso mamin eid echad mechayv shvua. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says in the name of Shmuel that this whole thing, this machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, okay, about, Shmuel says the initial claim needs to be 2 kesef, Rav says he has to be denying at least 2 kesef. This machlokes is when it's between Shimon and Reuven directly. Shimon saying, I lent you this much, Reuven is saying, no, you lent me that much. So that's where there's this minimum. But if we're talking about, let's say we're talking about 2 witnesses. So let's say Shimon brings 2 witnesses that testify that Reuven owes him 1 pruta. 1 pruta is already considered shava kesef, is already considered something, is considered mammon. So if 2 witnesses come and say Reuven, right, and testify that Shimon lent Reuven a pruta, so Reuven needs to give Shimon even if it's just a pruta. And similarly, if 1 witness if Shimon brings 1 witness, as we know, 1 witness is not going to force Reuven to pay Shimon the pruta, but he can be mechayev Reuven to swear that he doesn't owe the pruta. So meaning, when Shimon brings an eid echad, then he can require Reuven to swear about even a pruta. So when it's just between Shimon and Reuven, so then that's where we talk about, do you need 2 kesef or whatever? Does the initial claim need to be 2 kesef? Does the denial need to be 2 kesef? But if Shimon brings an eid echad, and then eid echad is mechayev Reuven to swear, that could even be just for a pruta. Let's read that again inside. Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar Shmuel lo yishanu ela b'tainos malva vodas lova. This whole machlokes between Rav and Shmuel with the whole shtei kesef thing is when it's between Shimon and Reuven directly. Shimon saying, I lent you this. Reuven saying, knows that. Aval tainos malve v'ha'ados eid echad. But if the reason for the shvua is because Shimon is saying to Reuven, you owe me a pruta, and he brings an eid echad to corroborate his claim, and that eid echad is mechayev Ruvain a shvua, well then afilu lo tanu ela bepruta, even if Shimon's claim is for a mere pruta, chayev Ruvain would have to swear about that. My time outcome dichsiv, because the pasuk says lo yakum eid echod beish l'chol avon l'chol chatos. You can't have an eid echod, right? You can't be mechayev anybody anything, right? Like to actually have to pay money or anything with an eid echod for any avons or chatases. L'chol avon l'chol chatos hu de'eno kam aval kamu l'shvua. An eid echod is ineffective for chatases and avonses, but an eid echad can be mechayev a shvua that Reuven would have to swear. V'tanya kol makom sheshnayim mechayevin oso mamin eid echad mechayev shvua. And we learned in the Brisa that any place where two witnesses would be able to mechayev money, and as I explained a minute ago, if Shimon brings two witnesses that he lent Reuven even a pruta, Reuven would have to pay that pruta. So any scenario where two witnesses would be mechayev Reuven to pay, one witness would be mechayev Reuven a shvua. Okay? And therefore, in that case, if Shimon brings a witness, Reuven would have to swear even about just a pruta. Fine. Where are we? V'amar Rav Nachman Omar Shmuel. It says of Nachman Omar Shmuel, Tuano chitin v'sorin. Okay, this is what we were talking about earlier in the daf. That if Shimon says to Reuven, you owe me wheat and barley, v'hoda lo be'echad man, and Reuven admits to one of them. I'm just going to say barley, okay? By the way, what do you think of barley for a dog's name? Barley. I feel like it could work. Does anybody know of a dog named Barley? I feel like the dog's name like Marley, Harley, Barley. My brother has a dog named Andre. Maybe I'll suggest Barley. Maybe they could change Andre's name to Barley. Could work. Barley. Anybody know of any dogs named Barley? I feel like it could work. Hakoponim. Ve'omer of Nachman, Omar Shmuel, I'm going to read that again. Tanu chitim v'sorin v'odol be'echad me'en chayev. Says of Nachman, Omar Shmuel, that if Shimon says to Reuven, you owe me, give me back my wheat and barley. Reuven says, all I owe you is barley. Chayev, that would be modeh b'miktzas. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says to Rav Nachman, I guess, shkoyich v'chein am Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan also says this. Michlal de polig ole Rish Lakish. In fact, the Gemara does that from the fact that Rabbi Yitzchak is saying that this is specifically the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Is that to imply that it's only the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, but that Rish Lakish would argue that Rish Lakish disagrees? So right, so Michlal de polig ole Rish Lakish. So does that imply that Rish Lakish disagrees with this halacha? So you could argue that those who say Misha hava shoyle v'shosikle, interesting. Not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean that Rish Lakish disagrees. We don't know. It could be that when Rabbi Yitzchak heard Rabbi Yochanan say this halacha in the Beis HaMedrash, that wheat and barley, and admits the barley is chayiv. It could be that when Rabbi Yitzchak heard Rabbi Yochanan teach this halacha in the Beis HaMedrash, Rish Lakish hadn't commented, because Rish Lakish would generally wait until Rabbi Yochanan was done giving the shir and saying what he had to say, and only afterwards he would then engage with Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish wouldn't engage with Rabbi Yochanan during the shir, but he'd wait till after the shir. And therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak didn't hear Rish Lakish say anything, and Rabbi Yitzchak, by the time Rish Lakish discussed it with Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yitzchak had already left, so he didn't know what Rish Lakish says about it, so he left it out. Again, he could that Rish Lakish would wait for Rabbi Yochanan to finish the shir before discussing things with him, and therefore Rish Lakish hadn't said anything, and by the time Rish Lakish discussed it with Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yitzchak had already left, so therefore he didn't say anything about it. You could also say Mishta Avashasi le Vishasik le. So those who say that Rish Lakish was taka drinking at the time, and therefore he didn't say anything. He was drinking water, so therefore he didn't say anything to Rabbi Yochanan because he was drinking. And therefore, I guess Rabbi Yitzchak didn't hear anything, and he had left by the time he was done drinking, I guess, and he didn't know what Rish Lakish said. I was once thrown out of a shul for bringing coffee. One time they threw me out of shul for bringing coffee. Let's go weiter. So let's say that this taka is a support for Shmuel, right? That Shmuel says that if Shimon claims wheat and barley, and Reuven admits only to barley, so says Shmuel is chayiv, it's moda b'miktsas. So let's say that the following is a support for that shita. To'anu chitin v'odelo besorin potter. Our Mishnah says, our Mishnah says that if Shimon claims wheat and Reuven says barley, apples and oranges, Tanakama says potter. Rabbi Gamliel mechayev. So Gamliel Taka says chayev because he doesn't require the hodah to be the same type. He doesn't have such a requirement. But according to Rabbi Gamliel, it's fine if Shimon's talking about wheat and Reuben's talking about barley. But Tanakama says it's not fine. But let's say time of the Tanu Chitin Fadula Besorin. But let's be medayik from our Mishnah. The reason why he's potter from a Shevuos is because Shimon's talking about Chitin, Reuven's talking about Sorin, apples and oranges. Ha-Chitin visse Orin Fadula Bechon Men Chayev. But maybe the implication is that if Shimon, however, had said to Reuven not just about wheat, but wheat and barley, and Reuven admitted to the barley, maybe in that case, chayiv. Reuven would be chayiv. In that case, it would be considered modeh b'miktsas, like Shmuel says. No, you could say hu adin tafilu chitin v'sorin nami potter. No, you could say that even if Shimon is talking about wheat and barley, and Reuven says, no, it's just barley. It could be that according to the Mishnah, that according to the Chacham, it would also be potter. The reason why Shimon is only claiming chitin in the Mishnah, and Reuven's talking about barley, is to teach how extreme Rabbi Gamliel's shita is, that even though they're talking about apples and oranges, Shimon's talking about wheat, Reuven's talking about barley, still Rabbi Gamliel says, I don't care, Reuven is chayiv because they don't, according to Rabbi Gamliel, they don't need to be the same types. Tashma, come and hear this. To'ano kelim v'karkos, v'od b'kelim, v'kofar b'karkos v'kofar b'kelim potter. If Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me vessels and you owe me property. Right? To'ano kelim v'karkos, v'hod b'kelim, and Reuven says, yeah, that's right, I owe you vessels. V'kofar b'karkos, but I don't owe you property. V'kofar b'kelim. Or, Reuven says, yeah, that's right, I owe you properties, but I don't owe any vessels. Potter. So in those two cases, potter. That's going to be the important part, right? That meaning, Reuven is saying, I owe you vessels, but I don't owe you, right? Shimon's saying vessels and property. Reuven is admitting to one of them. Whether it's the property, whether it's the vessels, and we're saying he's potter in that case. Okay, but let's go on. What else does the Mishnah say? Hoda b'miktzas karkaos, potter. If Reuven says, I only owe you some of those properties, well then he's potter from shul because you don't swear about properties. B'miktzas kelim chayiv. But if he admits to part of the vessels, well then it's moed b'miktzas, will be chayiv. Now, as I said, the important part was the first part. That Shimon is saying, Reuven, you owe me vessels and property. Reuven says, no, I only owe you vessels. Or no, I only owe you property. We say in that case, Reuven is potter. So we want to say, why is he potter? Because we're talking about properties. Proper, right? Meaning, Shimon is claiming two things, vessels and property. The thing is that property it's not two things that you swear about. Property you don't swear about. So therefore it's not going to be considered modeh mixas. It's not considered modeh mixas because one of the things is something that's not b'chlal shayich to Shevuos, right? So time of the kelim v'karkos, the karkalav bas shvui. The reason why Reuven is potter in that case is because we're talking about property which is right. So one of the two things that Shimon is claiming is property, and property is something that you don't b'chlal swear about. Hakelim v'kelim dumi dekelim v'kakaos chayev. But if both things that Shimon was claiming from Ruvain were vessels, but different kinds of vessels, just like in the example in the Mishnah, you have vessels and property, two different things. So maybe here you have wheat and barley, right? So in that case, those are both things that you swear about. So that case, maybe, if he denies one of them, he would be chayev, right? We said in the Mishnah potter because we're talking about vessels and property. There's no swearing by property. But if we're talking about two different things that you swear about, like wheat and barley, and Reuven admits to one of them, maybe he should be chayev. Like Shmuel is saying, it's a support. So we say, no, hu adin, da'afilu kelim v'kelim, nami potter. No, even you can say that even if in a scenario of two different types of vessels, for example, wheat and barley, you would still be potter, even if Reuven admits to one of them. The reason why the Mishnah talks about vessels and properties, it's to teach us that when Reuven admits and he says, well, I only owe some kelim, some vessels, so he has to swear about the vessels, because he's moed b'miktzas on the vessels, and once he's swearing about the vessels, then we're megalgal in shvua, and he also then swears about the properties that are as well. Once he's swearing about the vessels, he also swears about the properties, and that's why the Mishnah Dafka talks about vessels and property, not to imply that if it was two different types of vessels, you'd be chayav shvua. No, the reason why the Mishnah talks about vessels and property is to teach that when you're moed b'miktzas by vessels, you have to swear about the vessels, and then you also swear about the property. Megalgal in shvua. Mike Mashman Zoykikin. But what do we understand? You're telling me that the Mishnah here is coming to teach me Zokakin? That once already you're swearing for the vessels, you're also then going to swear about the property? Chever, we learned Avchav of Masechta Kiddushin ages ago. Tanina, we already know that from Masechta Kiddushin. Zokakin is anachosim sheish lo'em achrayis l'shav aleim. That when you have to swear about the vessels, so when you swear about the vessels, you could then also swear, even though normally you wouldn't swear about property, but once you have to swear about the vessels, then you swear about the property. So we already know that from Masechta Kiddushin. Why does the Mishnah here have to teach it? Ha ikr hayagav gror nazba. Well, this is the main source. This is Masechta Shevuos, after all. Makes sense. If this would be the main source, but we talk about Gilgul Shevuos, that if you're mechayev Shevuah for the kelim, so you're ochid swear about the property. This is the real. This is the main source. In Kiddushin, we talk about it because we talk about all sorts of kinyanim and things over there, right? It says in the Mishnah, that vessels are acquired. What does the Mishnah say there in Daf Chavav of Masechta Kiddushin? It says in Daf Chavav of Masechta Kiddushin, Viat. So what does it say? Because of Shtav Chazaka, v'zokakin as anachosim sheish lehem achrayis yishav aleim. Right? That it says the chosim she'ein lehem achrayis niknin im nechosim sheish lehem achrayis. Because of Shtav Chazaka, as we know, we've seen this a million times, that when you make a kinyan on property, you can also make a kinyan on money, on metaltlin at the same time. And also v'zokakin as anachosim, that metaltlin and zokakin nechosim sheish lehem achrayis l'shav aleim. So once already was talking about nechasim sheish lehem achrayis, nechasim she'ein lehem achrayis, and what's and how they relate to one another. So we also included that if you have to swear about nechasim she'ein lehem achrayis, so then it can be megagal shvuah by nechasim sheish lehem achrayis. But that's not really the main source. Here in Masechta Shevuos is the main source for these halachos of Shevuos. Reb Chia bar Abba Omer Reb Yochanan. Now says Reb Chia bar Abba in the name of Reb Yochanan, To'ano chitim v'sa'orin. If Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me wheat and barley, and Reuven says, I only owe you barley, potter. Reuven does not need to swear about that. But didn't Rabbi Yitzchak say, just a few minutes earlier, that Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is chayiv? And then we got into a question, does that mean Rish Lakish argues? We said maybe Rish Lakish was drinking, maybe he was waiting, right? We just said that Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv. Now we're saying potter. Amaroi ninu alivid Rabbi Yochanan. Well, it was two different Amoraim quoting Rabbi Yochanan. First, Rabbi Yitzchak said Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv. Now Rabbi Chia bar Abba is saying he says potter. Okay, two different opinions on what Rabbi Yochanan actually said. Tashma, come here. Ta'anu chitin v'odelo besorin potter. Right, we're going to see similar diyukim that we just had to support Shmuel. We're now going to ask as kashas on Rabbi Yochanan. So now, so Tashma Ta'anu chitin v'odelo besorin. If Shimon says Reuven Yomi wheat, or Shimon says Reuven Yomi wheat, Reuven says I owe you barley. Potter Rabbi Gamliel Machayv. Say potter because it's apples and oranges. Rabbi Gamliel Machayv because he doesn't need them to be the same thing. So time of the Ta'anu chitin v'odelo besorin. The reason why Reuven is potter is because Shimon's talking about wheat and Reuven's talking about barley. Hachitin visa orin v'odelo be'echad men. But doesn't that imply though that does that not imply that if Shimon were to have claimed wheat and barley and Reuven admitted to barley, he should be chayiv? Chayiv. Huadin tafilu chitin visorin nami potter. No, you could say that even if Shimon said you owe me wheat and barley, and Reuven said I only owe you barley, Reuven would still be potter, like Rabbi Yochanan is saying. By the Katani Achi, the reason why it says Shimon is claiming wheat and Reuven's admitting to barley is Odeach al Kochot to Rabbi Gamliel, is to teach the extreme position of Rabbi Gamliel that even though Shimon's talking about wheat, Reuven's talking about barley, Rabbi Gamliel still says chayiv because Imamish doesn't require them to be the same thing, of the same type. Toshma, come in here. Toano kalim vikar kos. If Shimon says Reuven Yomi vessels and property, v'hodu bekalim v'chafer b'karkos v'chafer bekalim, and Reuven says I owe you vessels but not property, or I owe you property but not vessels. Potter. So Reuven is potter. Hodeb miktas karka potter. Also, if Reuven admits to some of the property, he is potter because you don't swear on properties. But miktas kalim chayiv. But if Reuven admits to some of the vessels, then he is chayiv for that time of the kalim v'karkos, the karkulav bashvui. So let's say that the reason why Reuven is potter when he admits to either the vessels or the properties, because properties are things that you don't swear about. But if you had two different types of vessels, similar to vessels and property, i.e. two different types of vessels, wheat and barley, for example, I would say chayiv. Nami potter. No, you could say even wheat and barley, and he admits to barley, would still be potter. For kamajma lon, the reason why we're talking about property and vessels in that example is the hoda b'miktsas kalim chayiv ala kakos. It's teaching that if he admits to part of the vessels, he swears about the vessels, but also about the property. My kamajma lon zokakin. What is it teaching us? What's the chiddush? That when you swear about the vessels, you also then swear about the properties? Tanino. Zokin is an achosm, sheishel and achrais, shavalein. But we already have the Mishnah in Kiddushin, which teaches that once you swear about the vessels, you then swear about the properties. Well, ha'ikr, this is actually the main source, hahi, but in Kiddushin, agav grora, nazba, it only mentioned it because it was already talking about similar things. Eisvei Rab Abba bar Mamel, the Reb Chia bar Abba. For Reb Abba bar Mamel, as the Kashan Reb Chia bar Abba. We have a brayse that says, To'ano shor, v'hodalo b'seh. Shimon says, you owe me a ox. Reuven says, no, I owe you a sheep. Seh v'hodalo b'shor. Or, alternatively, Shimon says, you owe me a sheep. Reuven says, I owe you an ox. Potter. To'ano b'shor v'seh, v'hodalo be'echad mein chayiv. But if Shimon says, you owe me an ox and a sheep, and he says, I only owe you a sheep, chayiv. So Rabbi Yochanan, what's the dilio? How could he say chayiv? How could Rabbi Yochanan say potter if this brayse is saying that when he says you owe me a ox and a sheep, and Reuven admits to the sheep, he's chayiv. So that would sound like wheat and barley. Reuven admits to the barley. He should be chayiv, not potter. So Amalei, so Rabbi Chia bar Abba, who had quoted Rabbi Yochanan as being potter, so Rabbi Chia bar Abba responds, Hamani Rabbi Gamliel he. Well, that braysa is the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, who says that they don't need to be the same type. Rabbi Gamliel, afilu reisha nami. If it's Rabbi Gamliel that they don't need to be the same type, then why does the reisha say that if Shimon's talking about sheep and Reuven's talking about oxen, Reuven's potter, but according to Rabbi Gamliel, you should be chayiv because types don't matter. So elo hamani admoni. So rather, this braysa is the opinion of Admon that we saw in the Mishnah, that Admon had said that if Shimon saying, you owe me jugs of, I think it was oil, and Reuven says, no, I owe you, what was it? It was jugs and jars. I only owe you jars of oil. So Admon says chayiv because it's the same type. It's still oil, right? So this, right? So Admon requires it to be the same type. So this brisa is Admon, and therefore, if Shimon's talking about a sheep, and Reuven's talking about an ox, so it's different types, and therefore Reuven is potter. But Admon would say that if Shimon says you owe me an ox and a sheep, and Reuven admits to a sheep, which is part of what Shimon had claimed, Admon would say that Reuven would be chayev there. So in the ratio, when we're talking about sheep and, right, Shimon's talking about sheep, Reuven's talking about ox, or vice versa, Reuven's potter. But when Shimon says sheep and ox, and Reuven admits to only one of them, Admon would say chayev in that case. So the brisa is Admon. Velo, so it's not the opinion of the Chacham, it's specifically the opinion of Admon. Velo dachui madchina loch, and then Rab Chia bar Abba says, look, and I'm also not trying to just push you off and say, you could say that brisa is Admon. The brisa really is the opinion of Admon. El Talmud Aruch hu b'fiv Rabbi Yochanan hamani Admoni. That this was like something that Rabbi Yochanan would say, that this specific brisa is not the opinion of the rabbis, it is the opinion of Admon. So I'm not just like trying to push you off, to blow you off by saying this is the opinion of Admon, it literally is the opinion of Admon. Amar Rav Anon, Amar Shmuel. It says Rav Anon in the name of Shmuel. Ta'anu chitin v'kodem v'adolo b'sorin. This is an interesting scenario. If so basically, if Shimon says, all right, Reuven, you owe me wheat, and before Shimon had an opportunity to say and barley, Reuven cuts him off and says, I owe you barley. So Kilu, Shimon was going to say, Reuven, you owe me wheat and barley, and then if Reuven admits to barley, he would be chayiv. Or this seems to be the gist of the brisa, or of the statement, that in that case, Reuven would be chayiv, like Shmuel. Now, however, after Shimon had said, Reuven, you owe me wheat, Reuven then cut him off and says, I owe you barley. So in practice, all you had was that Shimon says, you owe me wheat, Reuven says, no, I owe you barley. So in that case, he's potter. And it seems to be that even if Shimon would then say, hey, you cut me off, I was going to say, he owes me wheat and barley, it sounds like it would be too late, because Reuven already admitted, already said, no, we cut him off and said barley before Shimon had a chance to say barley. So Amar Ravana says, Ravana Amar Shmuel. There's Ravana Amar Shmuel. So of course it's the opinion of Shmuel that if Shimon says wheat and barley, and Reuven says no, it's only barley, he'd be chayiv. But in this case, Ta'ano chitin, Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me wheat, v'kodem v'odelo b'sorin, and then immediately before Shimon had the opportunity to say and barley, Reuven cuts him off and says, no, I owe you barley. So effectively, Shimon says you owe me wheat, Reuven says no, I owe you barley. So, and for that he's potter. So im kimayrim chayiv. So if the judges say, okay, Reuven is playing games over here, he's being dishonest, he's just trying to, cut off, Reuven's being dishonest, he's just trying to cut off Shimon before he has the opportunity to make his whole claim, so that effectively it would be Shimon says wheat and he's saying barley, so he's potter. If the judges sense that Reuven's being dishonest, well then he's chayiv. But in b'miskavin potter. But if he wasn't being dishonest, if he was just answering honestly, prematurely but honestly, well then potter. He's potter because effectively Shimon said wheat and he said barley. If Shimon says, Reuven, you owe me 2 needles. Reuven says, no, I owe you 1 needle. Chayiv. That is why, right, the pasuk says, Ish ki yiten el re'ehu kesef o kelim lishmor. Right, if it had to be significant, it could just say ksafim lishmor. Right, it could just say 2 silver coins to guard, and then I would know that there have to be at least 2 of anything that we're talking about, and that right, that we're talking about anything that's at least 2, and that they would have to be significant. Kesef, something chashuv. But it also says kelim. Why does it also say kelim? To say that by kelim, they don't have to be significant. They don't have to be chashuv. To say lema shehein, even if they're just needles, that could be enough for modeh b'miktsas when it comes to vessels. Rav Papa says, Papa Tano Kalim Ufruta, says Rav Papa, that if Shimon says, you owe me vessels and a pruta, V'hoda Bekalim, he says, I owe you the vessels, V'chofer Bepruta, but he denied the pruta. So his denial is less than 2 kesefs. It's only a pruta. Potter. So in that case, Reuven's potter. Hoda befruta v'kafar bechelim. But if he admitted to the pruta but denied the vessels, chayiv. Then he's chayiv. Chada kirav v'chada kishmuel. So this, what Papa is teaching is, in one sense supporting Rav, and in a different sense supporting Shmuel. Chada kirav. First, right, the ratio is supporting Rav, because it says if he admits to the vessels but denies the pruta. Right, again, we said the vessels could be any value, even needles, but money would have to be at least shtei kesef. So Rav Papa said that if Reuven admits to the vessels but denies the pruta, we're saying he's potter because it's not significant enough. Like Rav, who says it would have to be at least shtei kesef. But then we say if he admits to the pruta but denies the vessels, so then he would be chayav because the vessels don't have to be important. And it's like Shmuel who says chita v'sa'orin, and he says only sa'orin he's chayiv, right? I.e., when he admits to like part of the claim, so then he is chayiv. So here Shimon says you owe me vessels and a pruta, and he says I owe the pruta but not the vessels. So he's only admitting to the pruta part. He would be chayiv for that because the vessels could be any amount, even a needle, any amount. And he's being claimed vessels and prutas. He's admitting to one of them. He's admitting to the pruta. He's chayiv. Like Shmuel says. Okay, I think we're going to stop here. Yeah. Shnaikis. Yeah. Whew, that was it. I think it's another over an hour daf. Am I even going to have enough time to finish recording? Oh, I'm like, Mama's like up against the clock. All right, I'm sure we'll figure something out. Anyways, so that was daf mem of Masechta Shevuos. We continued on the machlokas between Rab and Shmuel. We also learned about other halachas of moda be-miktsas, including what happens when there's chitin and sa'orim, right? And he only admits to the sa'orim. Is that considered moda miktsas or not? Some say yes, some say no. Peace out.